Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. As we begin to wind down the Maryland trip from spring 2024, we have two more stops to make. The first mall we're checking out is the Francis Scott Key Mall in Fredrick, Maryland. This is a Crown American mall that, although renovated, still retains some character inside and is still doing rather well for Fredrick. So join me for a quick walk through the Francis Scott Key Mall, and let's see what it holds in store for us during my visit in May 2024. History begins in 1978 when the Francis Scott Key Mall would open its doors for the first time. Being developed by Crown American, its original anchors would consist of Sears, Hess's, and GB. Francis Scott Key Mall would be the second mall built in Fredrick, and it would compete with the already existing Frederick Towne Mall on the other side of town. Francis Scott Key Mall would see success from the start, and would appear to have an advantage for the region, being located right off of Interstate 270, and that success would only continue on as the Frederick Towne Mall would begin to decline, due to that mall and that part of the city becoming notorious for crime. This would cause the Francis Scott Key Mall to become the dominant mall for Fredrick, as the mall would continue to expand and see many shops move into the Francis Scott Key Mall, whilst the Frederick Towne Mall would decline in the background. (1991) would see Leggett open a store at Francis Scott Key Mall as a new anchor, and around the same time, the mall would receive a renovation, giving us the look you see today. In 1992, GB would get acquired by Value City, and the store would then be converted to a Value City. And in 1995, Hess's would sell their store at the Francis Scott Key Mall to Hecht's, who would take over the space that same year. However, around the same time, Belk would acquire the Leggett chain in 1996 and would choose to not operate in Fredrick. They would sell their store at Francis Scott Key Mall to JCPenney, who were happy to take over the space and relocate their operations from Frederick Towne Mall to Francis Scott Key Mall in the early 2000s. Also in the 90s, Woolworths, an original tenant to the mall, would close, and their space would be converted into smaller shops. Going into the 2000s, the Frederick Towne Mall would now be a ghost town, whilst the Francis Scott Key Mall would continue to see success. In 2003, all Crown American malls would be acquired by Pennsylvania Real Estate Investment Trust, also known as PREIT. They would take over full ownership of this mall and still own the Francis Scott Key Mall as of the making of this video. In 2006, Hecht's would be converted to Macy's during the May and Federated Department Store's buyout. The mall would then receive a Barnes & Noble in 2007, and in 2008, Value City would close all of their department stores. However, the store at Francis Scott Key Mall would be downsized and converted to a Value City Furniture, which continues to operate in the mall as of today, whilst the other half of their building would become a DSW. Not much else would happen going into the 2010s, but the mall would still continue to see success. 2014 would see the addition of a Dick's Sporting Goods at Francis Scott Key Mall, but other than that, not much else would happen throughout the rest of the 2010s. Going into the 2020s, the mall would have to shut down for a couple months during the COVID lockdown. However, when the mall reopened, it would continue to see success. Even Sears was still open around this time. However, that wouldn't last too long, as in December 2022, Sears would finally announce the closure of their Francis Scott Key Mall location, and the store would officially close for the last time in January 2023, as the final Sears location in the state of Maryland. Plans would be announced in 2024 to convert the old Sears building into a Dick's House of Sport and turn the space that Dick's Sporting Goods currently occupies into a gym. However, as of the recording of this voiceover, nothing has been done to either building yet. As of today, the Francis Scott Key Mall continues to be the dominant mall for the Frederick region, as the Frederick Towne Mall closed well over 10 years ago and for the most part continues to sit abandoned besides a couple shops and a movie theater being reoccupied. Whilst the Francis Scott Key Mall is continuing to be successful, seeing many tenants occupy the inside of the mall and continuing to remain as a retail hub for Frederick, it doesn't seem like the Francis Scott Key Mall will slow down anytime soon.
Francis Scott Key was an interesting little mall with a pastel 90s color scheme, a small fountain, and plants scattered throughout the mall. Although not my favorite mall of the Baltimore trip, this mall had some unique features of its own, such as a fossil and rock store, which we enjoyed exploring in. Although we were kind of on edge when walking through this mall due to security being somewhat intense, it was a good addition to our trip and a good way to wrap it up, since it was one of the last places we visited.
Now, Francis Scott Key definitely was my least favorite of the trip. However, that doesn't mean it's a bad mall. It actually is a really nice looking mall. I think I was just so harsh on this mall when we were here. just because we were extremely burnt out by this point, as this was our 10th of 11 malls we were seeing in 3 days. And compared to all the other malls we already saw on the trip, this was the least interesting in my opinion, but you could still see all the Crown American architecture when you look up at the ceilings, and the mall even has cool flooring and a nice little fountain in the center. However, compared to other Crown Americans I've been to, this one definitely is in the lower ranked of the Crown American malls I've visited, and I think it's just because it's been renovated. However, this definitely is one of the better looking renovated Crown American malls. I've seen much worse than this, but a great thing about this mall is that it is still doing really well for the region. The mall still has a great variety of stores inside, and a couple memorable things about this mall was the rock shop that Sophia mentioned, as well as a music store that was here that I remember, and it was really cool. I actually ended up purchasing something for a friend in that music store. However, Sophia did mention the security here. There was just a ton of guards walking around here, and it made us a little bit nervous about filming in here, but we still managed to get this video as quick as we could. Because to be honest, we just didn't want to spend too much time here because we still had one more stop to make after this mall. But with that being said, Francis Scott Key Mall definitely has a bright future ahead. It seems like it'll continue to remain successful for the region, and I think with just a little bit of work, I think this mall is almost perfect. One thing this mall is lacking is a food court and many food tenants. I think this mall definitely needs more dining options, but other than that, I think this mall is set to continue with a successful future. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all for watching my video tour of the Francis Scott Key Mall in Fredrick, Maryland. If you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like as it greatly helps support the channel. And whilst you're at it, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more mall videos like this to be released to more viewers like you. I have a lot more mall content coming to the channel very soon with a lot more stuff you're not going to want to miss. So be sure to subscribe for more malls to come your way. I also have an Instagram linked in the description with sneak peeks of future videos coming to the channel. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Take care, stay awesome, and have a blessed day. I will see you all in my next video.